Welcome back to Fossil Ridge Games. I'm super excited for the Galaxy block, basically the Guardians of the Galaxy block for Marvel Champions living card game. What I'm going to do this season is just kind of mix things up a little bit differently. When I do the videos specifically for deck building, I'm kind of going to give you some ratings, and I'm going to define the ratings for the characters, and then I'm going to kind of go into general strategies for deck building for that character, and then finally I'm just going to give you an example deck that I built for that character. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the builds to hopefully help you out and give you the knowledge that you need to build those killer decks. Let's get into Rocket Raccoon's stats. First and foremost, we have survival. This is a combination of hit points, defense, and recovery values. For Rocket, unfortunately, they're fairly low, so his survival ability is going to be a little bit strained, so you have to worry about that when you're making decks. Next is growth. This is a combination of resources, card drawing, hero hand size, and alter ego hand size. This is, in general, a little bit better than most heroes. I think what really kind of gives him an edge is his hero ability, where he's doing card drawing when you deal excess damage to an enemy. Next up is power, which is a combination of thwarting, attacking, and basically the cards that come with the hero itself. So the thwarting ability, especially when you get it sort of established into the game, is going to be a 3 value. That's going to be pretty high. You can get his attack up to a 2 value by using the hero cards. And then the hero deck cards in general are pretty decent. So I think his overall power value is an 8. Next up is abilities, which is a combination of hero abilities and alter ego abilities. This score is, it's kind of average. It's a 7. I think that both his hero and alter ego ability are pretty decent, but there's nothing that's super overpowered or underpowered. First off is survival. When you're playing Rocket Raccoon, he's kind of squishy right at the beginning of the game. Not a very good defense value and only 9 hit points. To enhance his survival, his core set comes with Cybernetic Skeleton, which increases his hit point total by 3 and his attack rating by +1. That's fantastic. And then the card on the right, I won't even attempt to pronounce it. And basically what this does is that he can heal 2 points of damage every time he deals damage to an enemy. So he's going to have a lot of sort of like laser weapons, typically guns, rocket launchers, pistols, things of that nature in the deck. So if you want to regenerate him during the middle of the game, that's a great way to do it, by just simply doing damage and hurting things out on the table. Another good survival technique for any character with a low defense value and low hit points is to load that deck with a lot of allies. So as an example, I just threw Groot and Ironheart onto the table. So if you want to survive those attacks from the villain, remember that you can always use allies to block. So even if your hero is a little bit squishy, power up your deck with a lot of allies. As a final note, we're going to talk about Rocket Raccoon's alter ego action. And this is an ability that he could use once per round. And you could go ahead and discard a tech upgrade from play that you control, and then you can draw 2 cards. I think that this is pretty decent. Honestly, you don't use it very much. I tried to really avoid going to my alter ego form as much on Rocket, and kind of what I did is I infused my deck with a lot of allies so that they're defending, and I spent very, very limited amounts of time in my alter ego form. Because he has such low amounts of hit points and a low defense value, it is extremely easy for him to get killed during the course of the game and defeated. So what you really want to do is kind of avoid going to your alter ego mode. If you do have to go into it, there are some tips and tactics that you can use to kind of enhance his ability to regenerate. So I'm going to go ahead and throw those into the game. These are both basic cards. Obviously the one on the right I've talked about a million times. It's going to add a +2 recovery value, so it's just going to go to a 5. Now the card on the left is a little bit newer, and I kind of like this card, and during this expansion is the first time I really utilized it. But what this allows you to do is heal damage from your alter ego equal to your recovery. Now you have to be in your alter ego form to do it, but if you have these 2 out, you can go ahead and play this card and heal 5 points of damage. In addition to that, if Rocket Raccoon is ready, you can exhaust him and then recover an additional 5. So by doing this combo in one turn, you can regain 10 hit points on Rocket Raccoon. Now, obviously he's only going to start with 9 hit points, But if you use his Cybernetic Skeleton in conjunction with Endurance, you can raise his hit point total to 15, which is pretty awesome, and that's a great way for him to survive. So once you have some of these cards out, you can use them together when he's in his alter ego mode to really boost him and make him super powerful and heal him very, very quickly. Next up is the concept of growth, or the character's ability to deal with resources and card drawing. I think these really go into the same bucket. In addition to that is the hand size of the character as well. So the Rocket Raccoon deck contains 2 copies of Salvage. This is a great card, and you're going to notice it's going to have a wild resource, and then it also has a mental resource on the card. But irregardless of that, it's 2 resources, and you can use that to play out a host of whatever it is, upgrades or event cards, whatever it is you need to play the game. So having these 2 copies is fantastic. This one also has an additional action, is that you can basically recycle a tech upgrade from your discard pile, and it goes on top of your deck. So something that I found myself gravitating towards is literally this battery pack. So I found myself constantly using Salvage to recycle that battery pack. The battery pack then powers your weapons, so your sort of handguns, your rocket launcher, and that big particle cannon, which is really fantastic. So I just kept cycling and getting more and more ammo. Rocket Raccoon's hero ability is basically, if you ever do any excess damage to an enemy, you get to draw a card. And what's fantastic about excess damage, it could be 1 point of damage, it could be 5 points of damage. But once you even just have 1 point of damage, it allows Rocket Raccoon to draw a card. And this isn't a limited action, so you can do this as many times to as many enemies every phase to draw those extra cards. So something that you're going to notice is that the Rocket Raccoon deck has 4 restricted weapons in it. So just as a heads up, restricted means that you can only have 2 restricted items out at one time. Now for all the other heroes that we've seen throughout the course of this game, none of them really have that many restricted cards. It's pretty rare to actually find that, especially a deck that has more than 1 restricted card. This one has 4, so you have to be mindful that you can only have 2 of these out at any given time. There's 2 copies of Rocket's pistol, 1 particle cannon, and 1 rocket launcher in the deck. So just be sure you understand that rule. And what you're going to do is with these weapons, you're going to use them in conjunction with Rocket Raccoon's hero special ability. So anytime you see an enemy that's just down to maybe 1 hit point, go ahead and shoot it with the pistol. That's going to give you your excess damage and allow you to draw a card. Also, the particle cannon is great because it has an overkill ability, and it also hits for 4 points of damage. So let's say you have, sort of an intermediate minion out on the table, maybe with 3 hit points. Go ahead and blast it with a particle cannon, and then that extra 1 point of damage goes to the villain, but it allows you to draw a card. And the other thing is great is the rocket launcher. It allows you to hit multiple minions out on the table, and a lot of those, maybe you want to target one of the other characters in the game. If you're playing a multiplayer game, one of the other players at the table, you can wipe out a lot of their minions and deal excess damage to them as well. Things like this work really good for swarms of enemies. Maybe you're fighting Ultron, you're trying to wipe out those drones. So always be cognizant of the weapons that you have on the table and use them effectively. The Rocket Raccoon deck also comes with 2 copies of Reload, which allows you to ready any of the tech upgrades that you control. As you just saw in the last clip, we have 4 different weapons that are tech upgrades. And so if you really want to have a big turn, go ahead and understand that you can do a lot of excess damage by readying your weapons again and then hitting enemies. Now, the downside to this is that you're going to blow through a lot of ammunition on your weapons, which is okay. You can still end up with a big turn, and you can end up with a big card draw. Just realize that look for those battery packs to help you recharge your weapons, and that's actually a pretty fantastic combo to use, and I highly recommend it. Something really cool to note for Rocket Raccoon when you're thinking about deck building is this Thruster Boots upgrade. This is pretty cool. It's going to add +1 thwart to Rocket Raccoon, and then he's going to gain the aerial trait. So kind of when I saw this, I was thinking about, hey, what about a Justice deck with Rocket Raccoon? He already has a 2 thwart. If you throw this upgrade on him, he's going to end up with a 3. And then if I mix in the Justice aspect to the deck, like Heroic Intuition, his base thwart value is going to rise to a 4. That's a pretty high thwart value. And so when I was looking at that, just from a basic action standpoint, obviously his defense value is very low. His attack value, you can raise it to, a 2. And then if you were to do the same thing with the red version of this card, then you could get up to an attack of 3. But really having a thwart of 4 is really beneficial in the game. It's just like a basic action, and you can whittle down the threats either in a solo or a multiplayer game very effectively. And I'm going to show you just a quick sort of combo that you can do. And this is very reminiscent of a Quicksilver strategy that we've seen previously. Let's take Rocket Raccoon's thwarting ability just a step further. As you saw from the previous clip, we can have a 3 or 4 thwart pretty easily as the base value for Rocket Raccoon using some of those upgrades that we've seen. Now, something else that's great about this deck is that the Rocket Raccoon deck has 2 copies of I've Got a Plan. So let's say we go ahead and use a general sort of thwart action for Rocket Raccoon, and we're going to chip away, let's say 4 threats from the game. Then as a response, I can play I've Got a Plan. What that's going to do is it's going to allow me to ready Rocket Raccoon, and then it's going to give him a +1 thwart until the end of the phase. So at a very minimum, if I go ahead and then thwart again, I'm going to do it as a +1, which is fantastic. So I can thwart twice. The second one's going to be just a little bit more powerful. And now it's going to raise to a 5. So I've just basically removed 9 threats. And it's pretty cheap and it's pretty cost effective. Now from the Quicksilver Hero expansion, we also have this Civic Duty card. And this is something that we saw when Quicksilver came out. You could do this combo like multiple times because Quicksilver can ready so many times. So something else you can do is this is an upgrade you can put out on the table, and then you can discard it to gain a +1 thwart until the end of the phase. So what you would really want to do is burn this card first before Rocket thwarts for the first time. So now you're going to start with, let's say, a 4 thwart. You're going to buff it to a 5. You're going to go ahead and exhaust him, get rid of those 5 points. Then you play I've Got a Plan, ready him again. His next thwart will now be at a 6. So this is a way that you can eliminate 11 threats in one turn, and it's pretty cheap and cost effective. What makes this combo easier to perform is that these are upgrades and you can put them out on the table. So it's not like you have to have both I've Got a Plan and Civic Duty in your hand at the same time. As you play through the game, you can start dropping Civic Duty onto the table. So this combination made me really think that Rocket Raccoon can be pretty strong also in the Justice aspect. So think about Justice build decks. Obviously, the aggression line came with Rocket Raccoon. That's very powerful as well. Something else good to note is that since he is a little bit squishy, you can always use the leadership line to infuse his deck with a bunch of allies to play. And then on top of it, you can also play him as protection. He's not going to be as strong because his defense value starts pretty low, but you can offset his survival deficit by also playing a protection aspect deck. All right, now we're going to dive into the custom deck build that I made for Rocket Raccoon. This one is definitely not traditional, and it kind of harkens back to an idea kind of early on in the game. And when you look at the rule book for Marvel Champions, it simply says that you can pick one aspect. Now, it doesn't say how many cards of that aspect you need to put into that deck. So kind of an early idea that I had, and probably many players have, is that you can use any aspect, but then you can use a bunch of basic cards in your deck instead. So instead of focusing on, let's say, an aspect like Justice or Leadership, I can infuse the deck with a ton of basic cards. So that was kind of the idea for this deck build. I'm going to have more basic cards than I do the yellow Justice aspect cards. So from that perspective, you're going to see some kind of stranger gameplay. I'm kind of surprised that this works as well as it does, and I'll walk you through some of the benefits to playing a deck that has a ton of basic cards in it. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and show you a basic example deck build for Rocket Raccoon. So feel free to pause the video and take a look at the deck build actually on the screen. Something else I've noticed recently with Marvel Champions, especially a lot of the expansions that they've been bringing out, a lot of the cards are being reprinted. So some of the cards you can get relatively easily, but since there are so many sets now where you can get sort of the same cards over and over again, I'm going to not put in what expansion they're coming from at this point. Feel free to just swap something in or out if you don't have that card. It's not that big of a deal. I think once you understand the basics of the hero, the basics of the character, you can kind of mix and match on your own. One of the ways that I compensated for Rocket Raccoon's kind of low survival ability is to infuse this deck with a ton of allies. So instead of Rocket blocking the villain and suffering damage from it, I just said, hey, we're going to use just a host of allies to soak up damage from Rocket. This deck is going to contain 10 allies total. And anytime that you're running a ally-intensive deck, it's going to be sort of resource constrained. So a lot of your allies are going to be in the 3 to 4 cost range, as you can see on the table. So because I'm infusing the deck with 10 allies, I need a way to effectively generate a ton of resources. I'm going to show you how to do that using some of the basic cards. This deck is able to generate a fantastic and high and heavy number of resources very, very quickly. So just as a look on the table, I've got cards that have the potential, each one of them on the table, to generate 2 resources when played. Obviously, I have the basic ones on the left. In the center, I have the Power in All of Us, and you can only have 2 of these per deck. And these are going to be wild resources, but what's fantastic about this, if we're using these resources to put out basic gray cards, which this deck has a ton of, it has a ton of allies in it, then you actually get 2 wild resources for that. In addition, salvage on the right, and we kind of talked about this earlier in the video, that also provides 2, and one of those is a wild resource and the other one's a mental resource. So if you look out here on the table, I've got literally 7 cards in my deck that provide double resources. In addition to that, I have our old favorites, the Helicarrier and the Avengers Mansion, which you can use to generate even more resources through either card drawing or the Helicarrier through its special ability. So all of these together make this deck super cost effective when it comes to playing out cards quickly, particularly allies. So we had a ton of these basic allies. I think this deck has 6. You can even increase it even more. There's a lot more basic allies in the game that you could throw into the deck if you kind of want to offset this. So kind of going back to Rocket's deficiency, we're going to have a ton of allies coming in, and they're going to be easy to pay for. We have all of these resource cards, and so time and time again, I'm going to be constantly throwing allies out onto the table. After about turn 2 or 3, it's pretty easy to generate an ally every turn. Very rarely will you be not able to do this. So this is a fantastic combo, and it's a great way to generate a ton of resources and keep Rocket alive. Now, while you're playing this deck, you don't have to worry about defending. Rocket Raccoon's going to be taking a minimal amount of damage. So what you can do is you can focus on Rocket Raccoon doing a lot of thwart actions. So we kind of walked through what that looks like previously in the sort of general section of the game. And then I'm going to throw in a couple extra cards so you can see how you can chip away at the threats even faster. We have a ton of resources in our deck, so it's pretty easy to get beat cops out early in the game. So as you can see, this is one of my old favorites. This, in my opinion, is probably one of the most cost-effective Justice cards that exist in the game. You can continually just use this action turn after turn after turn to whittle down threats. It's very reminiscent of like the Prodigal Sorcerer from the original Magic the Gathering game, I think, in my opinion. So this is a fantastic card. What's kind of cool about this is that also, too, if you kind of have some problems with minions, you can burn this card and eliminate it. But if not, so think about Rocket Raccoon. He has a high thwart ability, and then you're going to be chipping away with the Beat Cop. So this works really well in solo and multiplayer games. You can handle a ridiculous amount of threat using Rocket Raccoon, so I think he's a really natural sort of fit for the Justice aspect. To summarize, the Rocket Raccoon expansion, which is part of Galaxy's Most Wanted, is a really, really cool set of cards. This character is really cool, very, very versatile. I think that you can build very strong aggression and justice decks. I think those are my favorite when sort of like playing through the mix of cards. I think those will probably do the best. I think leadership will also be strong. I do think protection will be a little bit weaker. So if you are putting those decks together, just be a little bit cautious and careful how you construct those decks. Hopefully you've enjoyed this sort of new format for tips and tricks to deck building, and hopefully it sparks some ideas and some cool concepts that you have for building your own decks. I want to thank you for spending your time with me today, and as always, have fun gaming.